church family. This is Pastor David, and I'm happy to be here with you for another weekly Visit with the Pastor. And this week's video is going to focus on Lent. What is Lent? When did it begin? And why do so many people celebrate this throughout the years in their lives? And what is it all about? And what's the purpose of it? And is it something that we as Christians should participate in? So first off, really, what is Lent, if you're not familiar? It is a 40-day period of fasting, meditation, and penance that helps us to lead up to the Easter season as we remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for us on the cross. And the word Lent originates from an Old English word that meant to lengthen or lengthen the days, or really if you translate it, it just turns into spring, which is why it starts in the kind of end of the winter season and the beginning of spring, or close to the beginning of spring, throughout the late February into March and April, depending on when Passover and Easter happen to be that year. And the interesting thing about Lent is that it can really be traced at least all the way back to the 2nd century AD. There was a man by the name of Irenaeus of Lyons, and he was a disciple of a well-known early church father called Polycarp, who many theologians believe was a direct disciple of the Apostle John. And he writes that the dispute is not only about the day, but it's also about the character of the fast. Some think that they ought to fast for 1 day, some for 2, but really it didn't really matter to him a whole lot about how many days you were going to fast for, but it really was about the fact that he was saying that this did not originate in our time, but it can be traced back to our forefathers. So he wrote that in about 180 to 190 AD, which many people believe then says that the apostles may have even had a time of celebrating and fasting to remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for them on the cross. And then later on it was finalized and really memorialized in the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, when they firmly established there should be a period of 40 days for fasting, excluding Saturdays, that would lead up to Easter Sunday. And so really then it might be, so why 40 days? Why do we need to fast for these 40 days? And 40 is a number that we find throughout the Bible that speaks of a time of testing, a time of setting apart, a time of contemplation, a time of meditation, a time when God is seeing if we really are the disciples that sometimes we think we are. And so what are we fasting from? Well, some people fast from food. Some people set off certain kinds of food. And really the original Lenten season was all about setting off meats, certain kinds of fish, and so that's why even today it's kind of been lightened up in our 20th century and 21st century Christianity to where people only normally fast on Fridays and they only fast from certain kinds of meat, and that's typically why you'll see things like fish as a special in many restaurants during the Lenten season on Fridays, because people are not eating meats. And other people that maybe drink alcohol, they say, well, I'm going to set aside alcohol during this period of time. I'm not going to smoke during this period of time. I'm not going to engage in television watching during this time. I'm going to decide to only use my phone for work purposes, but for no entertainment, nothing else. Whatever it is there something that you can set aside during this season? And really that, should I participate? That's really the big question. I mean, outside of Jesus' finished work on the cross, there's nothing that we have to do for salvation. But the question really becomes, is it a bad thing for us to set things aside and to take extra time in prayer, Bible study, and contemplative meditation on what Jesus did for us on the cross? Absolutely not. There's nothing wrong with this. And so that's why it really actually is a good practice and a good habit for Christians to put this spiritual discipline into place, to set time aside and say, I am going to choose through the Holy Spirit's power to not participate in various things. I, through the Holy Spirit's power, am going to get control over my body, control over my flesh. He is in control, not my body, not the old nature. And so I think that this is something that could be a benefit to us. So really, possibly even in the comments below, I encourage you, what could you give up? Or how can you encourage your brothers and sisters and say, I'm going to participate this year. Maybe not all 40 days. Maybe you set aside just a couple of days of complete fasting. Or maybe you do set aside the entire 40 days and say, I am going to not do something. I'm going to sacrifice something. I am going to spend that time that I would be doing something else to think about and remember the sacrifice that Jesus made for me. And then on Easter Sunday, we can come into church and we can just be completely jubilant and celebrate. I mean, this is the highlight of the Christian year, remembering how he conquered death, and he allows us to conquer death as well. So, what can you give up? Comment below and let me know. I'll see you next week.